Let's get it. This is Life's Essential Ingredients with Jeff and a Mike, where we hope to inform, inspire, and transform lives, one essential ingredient at a time. Welcome to the show. All right, listeners, we're back, and thanks for tuning in to another episode. Can't believe it. We are season 5. I never in my wildest imagination thought we would get there. Episode 2 with Jeaneen Tang, coming from Los Angeles, California. And again, thanks for tuning in. If you're new, this nonprofit is part of, or this podcast is part of a nonprofit, and we're the only nonprofit to utilize the pizza making process to create space for our guests to be seen, heard, and loved. We also write children's books, obviously host a show, and we use the most amazing handmade, hand-tossed sourdough pizza to bring out the best in each other. So if you're interested in checking us out in that space, just go to pizzadays with a Y.org, pizzadays.org. So about our guests, we are in for a treat. And I would definitely suggest you get out pen and paper, because Jeaneen is going to drop a lot of practical knowledge that is going to help us all just be better communicators. And the first place that you can find, and best place you can find Jeaneen, is from her book's website, and it's playdumbandsabotage.com. So about our guest, amongst her many other amazing attributes and talents, Jeaneen Tang is an actress, author, mother, advocate, and speech language pathologist with 23 years of experience working with a wide range of clients, from early intervention, which is 0 to 3 years old, to the elderly. She specializes in early language development and has a passion for training parents, caregivers, and other educators on how to best to address the needs of young children with learning to understand and express themselves. And we're going to explore all that, because that's a whole bunch in itself. Jeaneen's goal, I love this, is to shake up how we approach language development and to decrease the number of children needing speech therapy. Having worked in schools, preschools, and providing early intervention in homes, Jeaneen has firsthand knowledge of how we interact with children shapes the way they develop. Although there are many children who truly need speech therapy services due to disability, diagnosis, or impairment, Jeaneen feels a good number of children who are identified as needing early intervention speech therapy could be prevented if there was more parent, caregiver, and educator training on strategies to present and practice language. Jeaneen, thanks for sharing your many gifts with people all over the world, for empowering educators, parents, friends, with the knowledge of helping people communicate to the best of their ability. Thanks for being our guest, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It's been an honor to be on the show.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. And you're a first-time guest, and we always start out each episode with a thought of the day, which is a little bit goofy, but that's kind of who I am. And after researching you, I picked a quote that just resonated with me. But then it's kind of funny, because I ask you, why would I pick that quote out of, I don't know how many millions or billions of quotes that are out there that I could choose from. And this one's from the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Here it goes. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And I'm getting goosebumps just giving you a quote. And that's a deep one. Why would I pick that for you?
Oh, I think, Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my son's favorite people. We often read this book about him. I've definitely loved Martin Luther King Jr. I would say it's like this ripple effect, right? This you are one person, but you, by creating small ripples in your community and environment, can reach a greater number of people and create this amazing impact in the world that is unimaginable, in a sense, where you can't really fathom how far your reach can go. Hopefully. Something like that.
I love it. Yeah. And getting ready for this, I listened to you on another podcast and I listen like differently. It's a weird thing to even describe when I'm listening to get prepared for a guest, because I'm trying to almost listen to the words that aren't said, and then I don't know, you're probably not aware, but Mike and I are both basketball coaches. And well, I'm not coaching right now, but I've been one for 25 years. And when you're a coach, you look at the game so different than when you're just a fan of appreciating athleticism and watching teams play. And it's kind of the same thing in this podcast for me. I listen to guests and I just kind of take in kind of who they are and what they're trying to do for the world. And just in listening to you and the impact of your work, one client, one person, one student at a time. And I love how you use the word ripple effect, because that is what I was thinking about, how we are all tied into this pond, so to say, all together, and whatever affects one of us is going to ripple out and touch other people. And I think it's the highest compliment I can give you for your work, and then on the flip side, just knowing where that work goes, and I don't think I've ever really shared this with a whole bunch of people, but for some reason, when I was born, I guess it was there when I was born, but at least as long as I can remember, all the way up probably through my sophomore year of high school, I had this growth on my tongue, this white kind of dot, probably about the size of a small eraser on a pencil. And so, and I didn't really realize all this, but I was just a quiet, kind of weird kid. And I really think that thing on my tongue took away part of, who I was, and just kind of made me play small and never really share, and so I share that because I think in the work that you do, that you're allowing people to just play free and to just be who they are by empowering them with the gift of speech. And it does, back to the quote, what affects one directly affects all indirectly. And I'm getting goosebumps again, but I'm talking too much. But yeah, really, I'm just trying to tell you, thank you for the powerful work that you do.
Thank you. And to have a quote from Martin Luther King that you are thinking about me, that's amazing. That's like the highest level of appreciation from me to you. Thank you.
And cool that your son Che loves and you guys read that book. Yeah. So
yeah, there's a book. It's kind of written as a poem. It's called a Place to Land.
Oh, okay.
A Place to Land, and it's like one of his favorite books. We used to read it at least once a week. And we haven't read it recently, but for a time being, we're reading it at least once a week. And it's a very well written poem about Martin Luther King. And I think he's a great influence on my son for some reason, and he loves it. And going back to basketball, I love basketball. I coach my son's basketball team now, and definitely you see the game in a different light as a coach than you do even as a spectator and even as a player sometimes, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that was always the big, and we'll get into the show, but since you brought up, yeah, some people think, oh, just because you can play, you can coach. And Mike and I both played a pretty high level basketball, University of San Francisco. That's where we met and we're roommates. And that's Division I basketball, playing against some of the best players in the world. And yeah, you think you can just go, all right, I played it, I can just go coach. Not really. That's kind of where your communication comes in so much, and why it's such a valuable tool, and why I'm so excited for this episode to help people learn how to communicate to the best of their ability. I think that's who a good coach is, especially as you start to age and your body doesn't allow you to get out, because it's easier to show somebody, how to do a skill in a sport. And as your body starts to break down, you're okay, I can't do that. So how can I teach this same skill, but without the ability to actually take them on the court and show them how to do it? And it became a fun, challenge to get better and better as a coach, which I'm sure, you found in your role as a speech pathologist. So, yeah, really cool. But let's get into you. So what was life like growing up? Kind of we always start with that question just because I like the listeners to kind of just get a sense of, who you are, and you can take that any which way you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great childhood as far as, I lived in Hawaii. I grew up in Hawaii on Oahu and Honolulu. And I live in Los Angeles now, and looking back, I lived in paradise. You grew up and everything. And the one thing I didn't have was a family in a sense where my mother and father were divorced before I was two, and they're very grudge-holding people. They held grudges against each other, which actually impacted me more than them in a sense. And so I grew up with a single mom. She was working really hard, and my dad was very much out of the picture, not involved. And my mom, although she wanted the best for me, she wasn't always there because she was working, so she wasn't always at my games. I started playing basketball and volleyball in high school. She was at my gymnastics competitions growing up, but not always present in the stands. Does that make sense? But she was there in the background. And she always wanted me to try things, but never pushed me to do things too much. And she wanted the best for me, and I wanted to be the best for her. So I grew up kind of with this like people pleasing kind of mentality where I wanted to do really well. Um, and I went from, high school to college to graduate school and everything. And people say, why did you become a speech therapist? And that thought brought me back all the way to when I was about 8 years old. My grandfather was ill at the time, and he passed away from lung cancer. And I remember him being very ill, he wasn't able to do things for himself. And being 8 years old, I could do only so much, And so it really sparked this like desire and need to want to help people, want to do more. And I thought maybe I wanted to be a teacher. I had really great teachers growing up. And then in high school, I played, sports. And, you get injured and you needed to get taped up and all this stuff. And you had to go to physical therapy. And I was like, well, maybe a physical therapist could be someone that could have helped my grandpa. And I was like, maybe I'll go to grad school for that. But I knew I needed a graduate degree. So I loved English literature. And so I got my bachelor's in English literature and creative writing.
Mm.
And, when it came time to apply to physical therapy school, I felt like everybody was doing it. And it was such a competitive field. I wasn't sure exactly if I wanted to do that or maybe do an MFA for English and be a professor. And then someone asked me, have you thought about speech therapy? And I hadn't really thought about it because I never had to go to speech therapy. No one that I knew directly needed speech therapy. But, looking back at my elementary school, we did have special education classes, students, and they obviously would have needed speech therapy, right? And looking back, there was speech therapy. I just didn't really realize it. And so I was finishing my junior and senior year in Oregon at Pacific University. And the University of Hawaii at Manoa had a graduate program for speech therapy. So I thought it was a great opportunity to apply, go back home, and finish up my graduate school there. And so at the time, and even now, right, there's a shortage of speech therapists. Everywhere you turn, there's job openings everywhere. And so the school system in Hawaii was in need of speech therapists. So they said, we'll give you guys a stipend for school, and you could just have to work for us for 3 years. And I was like, oh, okay, you're going to pay for my school and I get a job. Okay, well, I wanted to do that because I'm like, it's a guaranteed job. And I ended up using, some of that money for school. And then I actually studied abroad for 5.5 months before starting the graduate program. I did 1 year prerequisite. So between prerequisites and starting grad school, I did 5.5 weeks in Berlin, and I was, studying German. I learned 2 years of German in 8 months, which is crazy.
Wow.
And it was a lot of fun. And I went to grad school and I worked in the schools in Hawaii for 4 years. And then I got the acting bug. I had done some performance speeches in high school and college, and acting kind of popped up right around 2003, 2004 in my life, and I was like, let's try it out. And I loved it a lot. And a lot of my acting classmates were moving to Los Angeles, and I was like, well, I had FOMO, fear of missing out, and I was like, well, what if I can do this, right? And so I left Hawaii in 2005. I thought my mom was going to be devastated, but she actually was like, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. So I did it, and it's hard. It's hard to do acting in Los Angeles, in the world actually, because it's a very competitive field, and it's not so much based on how good an actor you are. You need luck. You need all these things to align. You need to really grind it out. And unfortunately, it didn't really pan out. I still do acting sometimes, but speech therapy is my main job, which I love. So I got my license in California in 2005 and worked in the schools here for another 4 years and transitioned over to early intervention, which I love. And I also work in the hospitals with adults, as you were saying. And I love both populations. I can't really pick one. A lot of people will specialize in just one, but I really do like the variation because I don't get bored. I could put all my energy in the kids and then put all my energy in the adults. So I don't get burnt out. I don't get bored. I don't get too stressed over one environment. But I really love working with the kids. And like you said, I noticed that so many kids needed speech therapy that probably wouldn't have needed speech therapy if their parents and caregivers and educators were just trained a little bit better. And so that kind of brings me to where I am today. But, like you said, I have my son who's 12 years old now. And in 2012, he was born via C-section. He was normal. We as normal as you can have a child be, right? And then at 13 months old, unfortunately, he had an accident and fell off the bed and ended up having a traumatic brain injury that required an emergency craniotomy. And a few days later, the swelling in his brain caused a stroke. So, he had the stroke and the brain injury on the left side of the brain, which affected the right side of the body. And, at 13 months old, the doctors were saying he might never walk or talk. And that's a point in my life where I was very glad I was a speech therapist working in early intervention because I knew right off the bat he's going to need all these different therapies right away. So we lived in the hospital for 3 months. And when we got home, I had everything in line. We had speech therapy, we had physical therapy, occupational therapy, infant stimulation therapy, everything that he could possibly need. And, even though I am a speech therapist, I had to go back to work at some point, right? So I wanted to make sure he was getting speech therapy from somebody else. And people would ask me, do you ever do speech therapy with your son? And I was like, I do it all the time, whether he realizes it or not. I can't stop being a speech therapist, even though, I'm in mother mode. I'm always a speech therapist as well. And so, he just turned 12 this past year and he's in sixth grade, middle school. And, even though he still doesn't use his right arm or hand functionally,
Mm.
and he developed seizures a few years ago and he can't really figure out where his right leg is in space sometimes. So like climbing things and riding a bicycle is difficult because his foot needs to be, secured on the bicycle pedal in order to keep it on there. There are certain things like that. He learned how to play basketball, and I would like to say that I'm very instrumental in that because how do you figure out how to shoot with one hand, right? And do that consistently and have the strength to get that ball up and dribble with one hand and catch a ball with one hand and pass.
Oh,
He has learned to do all of those things. And, he's very social. He's graduated from a special ed classroom, special day class into a regular ed classroom with special ed resources. So, I mean, that's a very long-winded answer about how I grew up and everything, but it's a big adventure to where we are today. And like you said, I want to create a greater impact on the world. And what better way to do that than to, write a book and have it be replicatable and, It's not me being able to talk to everybody, but me being able to share my knowledge with whoever is able to pick up a book or listen to an audiobook or, you know, listen to a webinar or something like that.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. The whole show's over. All right, listeners, thanks for tuning in. He took us all the way home, but yeah, but this, I think we'll start with one of the last things, that you say that you want to find a way to help the world. And I think in the intro and in our quote of the day, you know, everything has to kind of start at home, and I think that's a big part of what you role model, and even in your intro, talking about, hey, if we can just do our job at home, which is not an easy job. And I have two kids. My kids are older, 26 and 28 now. And I'm not trying to say that raising children is easy by any means. It's the most challenging job that there is. And I couldn't even imagine doing it now. I was blessed to do it before technology became such a big impact on how we spend our time, and even our time face to face, just interacting and learning how to communicate. And I guess that would be my question to you, just the importance of, your tribe, your community, your team, the culture, and creating opportunity to develop those vital communication skills. What are your thoughts and any tips that you would have on somebody listening that, and I think it's kind of interesting how we brought up basketball, even this podcast and listening to other podcasts. Can we help the listeners who are listening see how they communicate and how they listen and how they interact with their children in such a different way that can allow them to do that better and not really take just those exchanges for granted?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much importance in interaction with your child from birth, you know, even from that they say skin to skin, right? That's communication. You're giving that your energy to your child's exchanging the energy to you. Anytime you are, able to tactily, touch their face or touch their arms or body, that's communicating touch and love. And then they learn to do that as well. So they mirror you. They have all these mirroring cells that are trying to copy every like little facial expression that you do, every sound that you make. They are born to be sponges. And so if we're only taking care of our child, right? So I had a parent who, her daughter was very well mannered, didn't cry. And so she thought that just taking care of the child by making sure the child was dry, warm, fed, and the baby wasn't crying, that was enough. That was parenting. And that's a big chunk of parenting, right? You want to make sure your child is taken care of. But the child wasn't talking much by age 2. So the child started speech therapy. And once the child started talking, she was like, I didn't realize you had to interact so much with your child. And everything is eye contact, facial expressions, babbling with your child, talking with your child, reading to your child, all that communication, they are absorbing all of that. And then hopefully learning to understand that and then learning how to mirror that and express themselves as well. You have to have that communication and energy exchange in order for them to become competent communicators down the road.
Yeah, not that I'm not going to put you on the spot with having to have the answer, but how have you seen, or have you seen a difference in the way that we're raising our children with the influence of technology and people being on their devices and not giving each other undivided attention, and the effects of that perhaps on speech? And it's all anecdotal because I'm sure there's no research out there on that exact specific topic. But have you seen, since you've been doing this since '05 now for over, 20 years, have you seen changes in that way from the influence of technology?
Absolutely. There's, such an uptick on technology, right? Kids are born these days with technology in their presence, whether they can hold it or see it or whatever. And then as parents, we're always on our phones. We're checking our text messages. We're checking our social media. We're checking our emails, all that stuff. So yeah, both parents and the kids are on technology. And, I've heard that technology is like a drug, right? Because they become addicted to it. They have this like, there's all this dopamine and everything from seeing different colors and pictures and all this stuff. And it's a stimuli that they can't pull away from. And it's teaching the child to get things right away. They don't have any, delayed gratification. They don't have that communication with the parents. And that's definitely, you see a lot more behaviors, right? Because once the parents want to take that screen away from the child has a tantrum. They can't they can't cope with having that device removed from their presence. And the parents too, they're not interacting with their kids as much. So I think that there definitely needs to be less technology and more actual communication. And if the child is watching a show, there are some great, amazing shows out there that are educational, right? But I don't think a child should ever be placed in front of a screen by themselves. I understand if you need to step away for maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do something in the kitchen, but you have the child within eyesight, right? You want to be able to still keep an eye on the child. The screen is not the babysitter. But if it's going to be, the kid is watching the show, ideally, I want the parent to be watching the show with the child and talking about it, right? Because then you can have that become part of the interaction. They can be discussing what's happening. They can be generalizing, if the show is talking about animal noises, they can be talking about the farm and next time they go to the zoo or the farm, they can see and talk about what they see related to the show. But the communication, just the interaction with a screen is going to be a very much a detriment to the child's communication and also the connection between the parent and child.
Mm. Well, great tips. Let's go in and try and get a little bit of clarity. And this is, again, a difficult thing to do in a short amount of time, but we're going to give it a shot. Benchmarks. Or say there's some new parents that are listening in. And again, listeners, thanks for tuning in. Somehow we've been listened to, and I think we're like 57 countries and 770 cities now. So I'm sure there's a listener that's got a newborn. So congrats on that. But here comes some good tips for you. What are some benchmarks that all of us need to know to make sure that we're hitting those, in terms of speech?
Yeah. So one of the great things to think about is like at 1 years old, you would expect your child to say their first word. So it's about 1 years old. So some kids are 10 months, 11 months, 12 months, 13 months, but right around 1 year, they're going to say their first meaningful word, right? They're going to say ball or mama, dada, but it's going to be meaningful. They actually know what that word means. They use it consistently. And then between 1 year and 2 years, they're going to be gaining a lot of single words and start to combine two words. So by 2 years old, you should have them combining two words like up, please, more ball, bubbles, please, combining two words with meaning. And then by 3 years old, you would have them saying at least three words in a row, 3 to 5 words, right? So it's that I want more goldfish, or I want ball. Having them say those three words there. But before 1 years old, that's when you hear the cooing, you hear the babbling, you hear them, I like to do vocal play. So I'll make sounds and hopefully the child will make sounds similar to that. Or the child might make sounds and I might say something similar to them and then build upon that. And then the more sounds and variations a child's able to make, that's when you're doing a lot of like maybe some animal sounds, some vehicle sounds, environmental sounds. Those are going to shape into actual words. So between, 9 months to a year, those are going to sound similar. The intonation is going to be more varied, similar to a adult speech. And then hopefully those transition nicely into that first single word.
And yeah, a lot and pretty easy to break that down for somebody that's listening of just, yeah, hey, I just need to make sure my child's hitting those benchmarks. And then just like you were talking about before, that one parent that brought that child to you, of just making sure that we're just constantly kind of talking and having fun. And I know listening to you on another podcast, you just, talked about play, building great communicators. What tips would you have? And maybe this isn't your area of expertise, because I'm going to go way out on a limb here, but now we're going to talk about a teenager,
Oh gosh.
how would you, because again, it's communication, and you're, a speech therapist. And I know that space comes with, hey, was there a problem? Then now I need to help them overcome that problem. But I think, and I'm not trying to mix things up, but I'm mixing it up on you a little bit. I think there's a lot of other factors that go into us not being great communicators. And it's just because we don't play. We'll just use that word play of interacting and creating space for us to be able to come to the table, so to say, and just have these interactions. So in a weird way, and probably a tough question, what tips would you give to a parent, a single parent, such as your mom, and you're a 15-year-old, you're playing basketball and volleyball both at the same time, working at Taco Bell, you're busy trying to get your AP classes, and you don't really have time to interact with mom, which is pretty similar to kind of what's going on now, unfortunately. What tip would you give to somebody to help their child just be a better communicator, knowing that's the skill that they're going to need once they leave our nest?
Absolutely. I think, think about a 15-year-old, the communication needs to be, the foundation needs to be laid as they're younger, as young as you can, right? But say you're a parent and you're having, like my son's 12, he's a teenager. He acts like he's 15. So working on, for him, a lot of responding when someone says hi to you, or, I think when they become teenagers, they just become mute sometimes. So having that conversation with your child as much as possible, because you want to ask them how their day was. And if they don't want to talk, they give you short answers, you can start talking about your day and what was great about it or what you could have done better, and then turn it back on them, because they might be a little bit more open if you are open first. Does that make sense? And I think that, giving the child the opportunity to feel like they are empowered with their lives, right? So if they have a job, or they have, a game, and what kind of things have they achieved that you can point out and be proud about them for, and make them feel that they are, having some responsibility in their life, and what direction that life is going to be going in. Because at 15, I was like, they're going to be out of the house, in a few years, in college or not in college, and they're going to have to be adults soon. So having communication skills is very important, because that's going to get you either a girlfriend or boyfriend, eventually, hopefully, get you a job, eventually, get you into college, or get you, your first job in high school, or getting into college, or your job after you graduate. Those are all really important skills to have. And a lot of these kids, especially now, they're in video games or they're in technology. A lot of these kids spent a good chunk of their time in COVID on Zoom school, and they've forgotten how to interact normally and have conversational exchanges, and how to keep a conversation going.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the big things. They don't know how to keep a conversation going, and then they just, like my son, I feel like he's regressing as he's 12 years old. I'm like, you knew how to conversate with people before. I was like, let's have eye contact. Let's respond. I was like, thinking about the golden rule, right? How do you want to be treated? Treat others like how you want to be treated yourself. So I always say, if you want, I was like, how do you feel if someone said hi to you and you said hi to somebody else? Sorry, if you said hi to somebody else and they didn't respond, how would that make you feel? So kind of teaching them life skills and social skills about how other people's, perception of you can affect their feelings.
Mm, yeah, no, and I totally agree. And we're not going to go here, but that's just the power of emotions and how that can really interfere, good or bad, to help us be good communicators, which is just why it's just so important just to sit and talk, especially parents with our kids, create the space for them to just come and interact and be who they are. And then try and make that the culture, the norm, so it doesn't feel so awkward with your kids having conversations with their parents, who are the people that love them most in the world and want them to go on and achieve. Every last parent that I know and that is out there, I'd be willing to bet any amount of money that they want a better life for their child than they had. And one of the best ways we can do that is just to sit and talk and help your kids learn how to communicate and learn how to listen. And yeah, so you're doing a lot of that. But let's get in, because the time's already getting away from us. We got to get into your book. First of all, congrats. I know it came out in February, went on to Amazon, and you have 96 reviews on there, which might not sound like a lot to you, but someone that's written 2 children's books, I think I got like 48 or 63 or something, but it ain't 96. It is hard to get a review. If you're going to go out and buy this book, which I suggest you do, and you can, again, get it from her site, or maybe you just have the link, but playdumandsabotage.com is the site, but it's on Amazon. Yeah, that's big time, and your reviews are incredible, with just great tips and just you sharing your knowledge. So, congrats, first of all, on getting that book out and using it, like you talked about, as a tool to help people all over the world. But let's get in, share what you want about your book and why the listeners probably should get out and check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote it as a handbook, right? Like not a textbook. There's nothing overly technical in the book at all. It's really a conversation that I have with whoever's reading it. And it has my story about me and my son. It has other anecdotal stories with other kids that I've interacted with, like my godson, who is now going to be 15. He is, he's way taller than me now, but when he was 9 months old, he was just the laziest little baby. He was not crawling and everything. So it was like there's a story about how I got him to actually start to move across the floor by tempting him, and rather than giving him what he wanted right away. So the play dumb and sabotage, the subtitle is mindfully under anticipating the child's needs and creating opportunities to practice language. And the play dumb part is because as parents and caregivers, as adults, we over anticipate what the child needs, right? We overthink, like, okay, the child's going to need this and this and this, so let's give it to them because that's what they're going to want, and that we don't want them to cry. And in actuality, we're doing too much. We're catering to them, and we're not letting that child interact naturally with their environment. And the sabotage part is just practicing. Like for basketball, if you're going to shoot a free throw, you're going to practice shooting free throws, not just do it every once in a while, right? So sabotage would be like during snack time, instead of giving a whole bowl of goldfish, give a couple pieces and have the bowl in sight but out of reach. So the child needs to either sign or verbalize or indicate that they want more. And then slowly by slowly, hopefully they can get to, I want more goldfish, please. And then you can be like, oh, how many goldfish do you want? Do you want 2 or 3? And so they can make different choices. But one of the great things I like about the book, and hopefully people find it useful, is that at the end of every chapter, there's exercises on how to implement each strategy, into your daily life. So to practice it. And like, for instance, one of the chapters is don't ask a yes, no question unless you're ready to honor that no. And people do this all the time. And I've been guilty of this before I learned this rule. where you would ask a kid, are you ready to work? Are you ready to go to bed? Are you ready to clean up? And if they say no, then what do you do? Right? Or if you're at snack time, you're like, do you want an apple? Do you want a banana? Do you want crackers? Do you want milk? So they're like, no, no, no. Then you're like, oh gosh, what do they want? So the way to get around this, a simple way is offer choices. So even for my son now, I'll be like, hey, it's time to go to bed. Do you want to brush your teeth first or change it to pajamas first? Or, hey, we have to cut your nails. Do you want to do it today or tomorrow? Or when he was little, I would say, we're going to get dressed. Let's wear, which t-shirt do you want? Do you want a blue t-shirt or a red t-shirt? And I would hold things about shoulder width apart. So because vocabulary is not understood unless you're exposed to it, right? So you want to show it to them so they can see it. And even if they can't talk, they're going to look at one of them. And then you can say like, oh, I want to wear the blue shirt. Great. It's like, I love blue. Blue is the color of the sky. And so you can talk about the vocabulary terms as well. And for kids who, if I'm doing a work task with a kid and I say, I have a puzzle and a book. Which one do you want to do first? Right? Or, I give them choices like, oh, what do you want for a snack? Do you want an apple or banana? Then they might look at one of them. So that's a great way to get around that no,
Yeah.
right? And for kids with articulation difficulties, instead of saying, can you say caterpillar? Right? The kid's like, no, I can't say it. I don't want to say it. I might say caterpillar. You say it, your turn. So I'm turning it back on them rather than asking them, can you say this? Do you want to say this? Just telling them, let's say this. It's your turn. And you'll get a lot more cooperation and participation with that.
Mm.
And sometimes, parents are like, I'm like, oh, one thing that I like to do with kids is set expectations, right? So if we're doing an activity and they love the activity that they don't want to be finished with it, I might set a timer and say, okay, we're going to be done in 2 minutes. But some parents are like, well, I asked my daughter, oh, do you want a 2 minute timer? And they say no. Then you can say, well, do you want to do it for 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes? And so you give them a choice, right? They're going to pick one of them typically. And
Yeah.
it also lets a child feel empowered.
Yeah.
So it's a really great way to get more cooperation, less behaviors, because you're letting that child have a little autonomy and letting them feel that they are making choices for themselves.
Yeah, I love that. I got two different along the same lines, but any tips for a parent listening that might have a child that's neurodiverse, neurodivergent, just on the spectrum, whatever terms we're currently using for that. But what differences do you see in helping them communicate and provide? And maybe it's the same, kind of strategies that you just described, or have you and all your experience come up with some other tips that might be helpful
Yeah, you can definitely use similar strategies, right? But you also want to take a look at where each child is performing at, because with a neurodivergent child, it could be a whole range, right? They could be very severe and need a lot more assistance, or they could be very mild in their deficits and need just a little bit extra support. My son falls under the neurodivergent because of the brain injury and the stroke, but not so much under the autism spectrum disorder. There's a lot of kids who are neurodivergent. It just means that they learn differently, they understand and might express differently, but they can be very intelligent. I love using for children with neurodivergent, especially autism spectrum disorder, using a picture schedule is great, or sequencing things by picture, because they like to have things that are concrete that they can refer to. If you're just telling a kid, we're going to do this first, this next, and this last, they might not remember. But if you can refer back to a chart and says, oh, we did this, we already finished this, now we're on number 2, and then we're going to do number 3. And you can point out either the pictures or the boxes that you've completed. That's very, very helpful. When I'm offering choices, I want to be able to either show the actual items or show pictures of the items to let them see because they might not be able to express, but they might be able to look or to reach for something. So pictures are really, really important. And it helps to redirect behaviors too. So even some kids, I have a little boy right now who cannot regulate his emotions a lot of times, and he gets fixated on wanting to do a certain thing. And, he wanted to be the line leader for his class today. And the teacher was like, "Oh, you were the line leader yesterday. Today it's some so and so's turn." But if she had a list of who was a line leader on certain days, then she could refer to it and say, "Oh, see, on yesterday you were the line leader here, but today it's so and so." So by having a visual component, it helps a child understand it better, and it's concrete because it's right there rather than just words that are, might not be understood.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love it. I love it. Let's get into since you do work all over the spectrum as far as ages go. Let's get in. Maybe there's a listener that has a elderly parent who recently had a stroke, and it affected both Wernicke's and Broca's area, and they're not able to talk nor to receive the messages, which is a whole kind of deeper. But just what, maybe that's too much, but what would be the tip for someone taking care of, mom or dad who recently had a stroke, and now tag you're it, they're living in your home, but they're struggling to communicate?
Yeah, it's almost very similar actually. So when a person has a stroke, they might not be able to express or maybe even understand sometimes. So oftentimes we will use either a picture communication system where it's a paper that has things that they can possibly point to. If they're not able to point, you can have two pictures about, are you hot or are you cold? And they might look at one of them, hopefully. Or do you have pain and have a smiley face and have a sad face, like I'm fine or I'm in pain. So different ways to communicate through pictures and visual, either eye turning. Sometimes when they're able to understand but not express, then you might have even for little kids, we have alternative augmentative communications devices. So they could either speak through an iPad or speak through picture exchange. Sometimes if they're not able to verbalize, but they're able to write, they can write down what they want to say rather than not being able to say it verbally.
Mm.
So there's all different kinds, but as you know, every person is different. And so, the best person to ask is whoever their speech therapist is, because they can specialize the treatment for that person.
I love it, man. I wish I know before we got on, you had a busy day and things going on, and we're even over our time. So I'm going to end with our last question. John Alston has a quote that I love. The only thing you take with you when you're gone is what you leave behind. And I'm not trying to get too morbid, but let's fast forward, another 50, 60 years for you, and you're on your deathbed and you're getting ready to take your last breath, and you're surrounded by Che and all the people that have been essential in your life. What is it that you want to leave behind with the people that have been in your life?
Oh, that is so hard. I think personally, I would want, the most important person is my son, and I would want him to know that anything is possible and he should dream really big and go after what he wants.
Love it. I love it. Uh, Listeners, it's been a very educational, I think, is a great word to use, and inspirational with everything that you've been sharing, Jeaneen. And we thank you so much for being our guest. Make sure you go to her website, playdumbandsabotage.com. She has her book that's out, that's doing great on Amazon, getting a lot of good reviews. And probably the best thing you could do if you have a child that you're just trying to help them communicate, get out. It's a workbook, and check it out. Any closing comments for you?
Oh, for me, just make this year the best year that you have had of your life so far.
Love it. I love it. All right. Hey, listeners, thank you. Normally my Pasho mic gets us out, but boom, baby, that just happened. We out.